though, so it counts.
All right. We're going to start a new chapter and a new topic in Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah. So, if you wanted to summarize the previous subjects, I'd say that the first couple of prakim were speaking about what we call Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, right? Then we took a sharp left turn and segued to the mazalos and astronomy and planets and all kinds of esoteric, um, discussion about the universe and the Rambam's, perspective. And then the last chapter, we went and spoke about Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem. So if you were to ask what the common denominator is between those three subjects, I think the only thing you're left with is good old God, God, because he is what is central in all of those three subjects. And we're going to continue the conversation about God, who gets very little press, um, unfortunately, in halacha. So that's why the Rambam talks a lot about God, specifically in the very first book, right, that he's writing in the Yad HaChazakah. So we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about um, the prohibition about erasing God's name. Okay, we call it mechika. Okay, we spoke about it. If anybody remembers, at the end of Makos, for those doing Daf Yomi, we did this around April time. If you remember, back in April, when we were the very, very end of Makos, the last parak talks about Eluhen Alokin, and this is one of them. All right. So we're going to start off Perek Vav. Kol ha'ma'abed shem min hashemos hakedoshim hatahorim shenikra behen hakadosh baruch hu. If anybody erases, ma'abed literally means to destroy, but what we call today erasing any of the names, and we're going to see that there are a lot of names that God has. Okay, Loka min haTorah. Those are one of the items that you get malchus for. Okay, erasing the name of God. Shaharehu Omer Bavodas Kochavim. So, what is the source? Right, there could be a few sources that come to mind, but the source that the Gemara uses is V'ibadatem es Shema min hamakom hahu. So, this is a pasuk. If you remember, that is from Parshas Re'eh. The context of the pasuk is anything but the pashtus, which is the pasuk is talking about when you come into the land of Eretz Yisrael, you have to remember you have to destroy the avodah zarah, binitatztem es mizbachosam, right? You have to destroy the mizbeachs and the asherah trees, and it says you have to erase the concept and the name of avodah zarah, right, from the map. You got to wipe it off the map. So the Gemara darshans hahu, lo tasun ken lashem elokechem. Right next to that pasuk, it says, but don't do that for God. So you could wipe out foreign gods and avodah zarahs and mizbeachs and avodah zarah trees, right, and the like. However, when it comes to our God, you can't do it. So that's we'll call it the roundabout way that the Gemara. We have this once in Masechet Shabbos. We have it in Avodah Zarah. We have it in a few places. That is the source about destroying the name of God. Okay. B'shiva Shemos Hem. And now we're going to go to chapter 2. Halacha Beis, and talk about the names of God. And there are 7 names of God. The Elu V'shiva Shemos Hem. Hashem HaNichtav Yud Hey Vav Hey. V'hu Shem HaMafurash. So the Rambam is making a statement that we have the term Shem HaMafurash, right? Most famously, the word Shem HaMafurash comes up on Yom Kippur, right? When we're all on the floor and we die and we koreh and we shtachve, right? Why are we doing that? Because anytime you would hear the Shem HaMafurash in the Migdash, you would do Hishtachavoy. You would have to you would have to bow down. What exactly the Shem HaMefurish? I don't remember who it's a machlokas between. I know it's not so clear whether it refers to the Tetragrammaton or it refers to the 70. There are many, many long names of God that we are not privy to. And we call it the Shem HaMefurish. Here the Rambam says Yud He Vav He, okay, which is our classic name of God, right? That's the called Shem HaMefurish, but there are other commentaries that say it's not the Shem HaMefurish because it Yud He Vav He we know. So if that's true, then it is Mefurish, right? So, right? So we do know it, we don't know it, whatever it is, it's a machlokas what the Shem HaMefurish is, but either way, it's one of those names that we're not allowed to say. That's why when we see in the Torah Yud, Hey, and a Vav and a Hey, we pronounce it unlike the way it's written. Right? That's a separate Vart. The Gemara says, Zeh Zichri L'Dor Dor, right? I'm written not like the way I sound. So that's something separate. So anyways, O HaNichtav Adonai, Ve'el, Eloha, Ve'elohim, Ve'elohei, Ve'Shaddai, Utzvaos. We know all these many, many names of God. We've had this many times, that there's different adjectives, there's different descriptions of God, right? And each one is a different midah, right? We have the Yud Gimel midos, we have, right? God has different, so to speak, behaviors and characteristics depending on, right? Depending on the subject. So all of these are names, but they're synonyms. And therefore, kol hamoch kafilu os achas mishiva elaloka. So if you erase one of these names, okay, even one letter, you are chayev malchus. Now, what if you have a tattoo that has God's name? Has this ever happened? This is a common question I've heard. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, it's a problem. So if you decide to get a tattoo, do not use the name of God, or else you're in a catch-22. Because on the one hand, you can't have a tattoo, but on the other hand, you can't erase God's name. So not a good thing to have. Okay, so now let's talk about a case where you have God's name, but you have letters before it and after it. Okay, so how do we deal with that? The Rambam says, Kol hanitpal lashem milafanav muter lamochko. Kagon lamid me la Hashem. If I have the word Hashem, that's obviously God's name. What if the word is La Hashem? So that's technically Lamed Yud He Vav He is not God's name. So how do we deal with that? So the Rambam says that because there's a Lamed, or he says Umi Beis, or the Beis of Be'elokim, Ukiyotze Behen Einan Kedushas Hashem. So that does not have the full Kedusha. So that's one case. How about after the name? V'chol hanitpal l'shem ha'achrav could go on, right? Could go on chaf shel elokecha, what does it say? V'chaf shel elokechem, or I'm sorry, v'mem elokechem, right? If you have a letter at the end that makes the word plural, ukiyotze behem einam nimchakim. So those cannot be erased. So it depends. Before the name, then that's fine. But if the letter comes after the name, then it's not fine. So what's the logic to that? The logic is the afal pisha niskadshu. So the Rambam explains that because I have the name of God, and then I have a letter after, so that letter after, so to speak, becomes holy because the name of God comes before it. It almost like it makes it kadosh. If it's before, then, right, then you don't have God's name yet. So therefore, it's just a letter. But if the word is but if that letter is last, then it gets sanctified by the previous name of God. So that's the logic that the Rambam uses. Even though we just said that if it comes after, you can't do it. However, it's a bad thing to do, but it doesn't fall into the category of Malkus. Okay, so it's still a no-no, but you're not chayiv Malkus. Avamakin oso Malkus Mardus. Okay, I don't think off the top of my head the Gemara makes this distinction, but the Rambam a lot of times always adds you that you're not going to get Malkus per se, but we give you Malkus Mardus. Malkus Mardus is what we call Malkus Derabanan, right? If you remember, when we do the Achetz, right? And I believe one of them is Malkus Mardus. I think that's all the way at the end. It's not Malkus de Oraisa, but the rabbis get to you. What exactly that means, not for now. It's a bad thing to do, though. We'll do another one. Kasav Aleph Lamed Me Elokim. What if you wrote the word Elokim? So how do you start writing Elokim? Well, you write an Aleph, then you write a Lamed. Or let's say you're writing the word Hashem, Yud Hey Vav Hey. So you start writing Yud, and then you write the Hey. So Eino Nimchak. So what you did was you wrote a mini version of Hashem's name, because Aleph Lamed is a name by itself, and Yud Hey Katzvos is another name by itself. So although you did not technically finish the word, because you started it and it's its own mini name, Eino Nimchak. That falls into the category of not erasing, and therefore the same rules apply to those mini names. And obviously it goes without saying that the Yud Hey can't be erased, because that is a real name of God. This is half of, remember the Rambam called it Shem HaMefurash, right? This is half of the Shem HaMefurash. However, Aval HaKosev Shin Dalis Mishadai, what if you wanted to write the word Shaddai, which is God's name, but you stopped short at the last letter and all you wrote was Shindalid? What's Shindalid? Shade, right? Which is a demon. So that's certainly not God's name. Or Tzadik Beis Mitzvaos. Or what if you wanted to write Tzvaos, which is God's name, but you only wrote Tzadik Beis? What is Tzadik Beis? Tzadik Beis is Tzav. Tzav is it's actually a machlokas rishonim what Tzav is in the Chumash. Tzav is one of the Shmona Shrotzim, right? Some people say it's a toad. Some people say it's a turtle. Either way, it is certainly not God. So therefore, it doesn't have the Kedusha of God, and therefore, Hareza Nimchak. Then you are okay in terms of whether you can, whether you got Malkus, you don't get Malkus, and therefore it can be erased. One last halacha, Sha'ara Kinuyim Shemishabchin Behemes HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, there are other descriptions, right? How about the way we begin Shmona Esrei? Could go in Chanum, Barachum, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vahanora, Vahaneman, Kano, Vachazak. There are other names that are on a lower level that are certainly adjectives to describe God. They, says the Rambam, Hareyan Kisha'ar Kisvei HaKodesh Umutar Lamachko. Right? They are considered Kisvei Kodesh, but they can be erased. Now, we don't, on a practical matter, have this problem. The way this manifests itself is what we call shemos, right? The reason why most shuls have shemos collections is exactly for this reason, is because the name of God appears, you can't throw it out, you can't put it in the garbage, you can't burn it, right? You have to bury it. So this is the foundations of the shemos, movement. Okay, we'll stop here.
That's how